couple more alumni with us. Stephen and Cody are joining us today, and very excited to do that. Have them. I have a special place in my heart for Cody. He was in cohort number one of the canaries in the mine, and so I'm particularly excited to have him here. We're going to wait just about another minute or so, guys, and just allow people to trickle back in, and we'll get started very soon here. It's great to have Steve and Cody here today with us, and I will let them introduce themselves, tell you where they, well, they just said a little bit about when they graduated, but when they graduated, what their study was, what their dissertation was about, where they're at now, and then we're just going to have them share a little bit about what it's meant to them to be a PhD, identity, influence, things of that nature. And we'll let them speak, and then we will open up the floor for questions. So Cody and Steve, take it away.
All right. Well, I'll just go in cohort order. How about that, Steve? I don't know what the order is, but my name is Cody Christensen. I am in cohort 1, alumni, and I will tell you this, it was one of the most grueling 4.5 years to 5 of my life. And I say that just for a variety of things, but just personally, I always said you do not want to move across country twice and start 3 new jobs during your time in the PhD program. That's not a good thing to do. I would just simply say my PhD journey began with a question, and I was a pastor in a church. We had a little hiccup in the mix of what was going on there. And for me, it was just like, you know, sometimes you got kids in the truck and you hit a pothole and you lose 1 or 2, no big deal. But as an organization, we hit a pothole and I lost 1st-tier leadership, 2nd-tier leadership. It was just crazy. And so for me, this idea of leadership transitions and how do you get people to retain? How do you get people to stay on long term? And so my PhD journey, I felt, was all over the map and massively shaped. I've been highly influenced by several of you that are on this call. And I honestly am deeply humbled to even be here, even in almost a peer level, which seems very weird. And so for me, my dissertation really went to that. And for me, my dissertation, my research work, I had a decision to make whether I was going to do leadership styles, which was very intriguing. I'd worked and researched a lot in that, or more into the organizational psychology. And for me, long-term, when we look at organizations, the organizational psychology was a big deal. And so I looked at 2 different variables, job satisfaction and affective commitment in the context of college presidential transitions in ABHE environments. And the reason for those 2 is job satisfaction. For me, it's a variable. How can we measure organizational perception? So that's how I was measuring that, was with job satisfaction. And then how can we measure people's desire to stay? And that's affective commitment. So it's not that I have to commitment, which is I need the money and benefits, or it's not that I need to stay because I'm loyal. But it's that I want to stay because I love what I'm doing here in college. But then in the context of, at that time, I'd moved into higher ed and I wanted something that would help the peers around me. And so for me, that was my dissertation journey and research journey as well. I was highly impacted just by my dissertation committee. I went outside the bounds. So I had a Dr. Sidney Freeman who he's from a secular university and his specialty is more in higher ed leadership. And so it was interesting. He was like, what is ABHE? And what is this other? He had no concept of any accrediting agency other than the normal ones he was familiar with. So that's at least my research journey. Steve, I'll turn it to you.
Excellent. Well, I'll just say my name is Steve Stacey, and I just want to start by saying what an honor it is to be back amongst my friends and colleagues at JU. It's good to see some familiar faces, but also good to see some of the new faces that continue to carry on the legacy of the program, continue to add life to the program. As was previously mentioned, I started my PhD journey on August of 2012 with cohort 2. I was on the 6-year plan. It took me until 2018 to graduate because I got into what some of the folks were talking about earlier in the previous presentation, out of the structured coursework, and then things kind of slowed down for me during the electives and the final draft of the dissertation. But thankfully, I had great mentors like Dr. Crumpton and some others who continued to push me across the line. So I'm very thankful for their leadership and their influence in getting me there. I completed my degree or my program, like I said, in 2018, and I used my research for 2 purposes. One, personally, to make sense of a lived experience that really had shaped myself and my sense of identity early in my life, but also to explore and understand deeper how organizational culture and organizational identity affects us individually in shaping our sense of self and how we come to perceive ourselves. Currently, I guess my work, I'm the Chief Quality Officer for the Department of Veterans Affairs, where I'm responsible for enterprise risk management and drafting policy and regulatory guidance. And I'm also a professor of leadership in the PhD program at Piedmont International University, where I teach organizational culture and leadership policy, leadership theory, and I'm currently chairing 2 or 3 dissertations at the moment. As I was reflecting, I guess, on my journey from, someone mentioned, I think it was in the previous presentation, the imposter syndrome. As I reflect on my journey from the very first orientation course in this program, where I've expressed or shared with Dr. Crumpton that I almost quit the program during orientation because I felt so overwhelmed by the amount of knowledge and experience amongst my colleagues that I felt that I had somehow slipped into the program without folks being really aware of what they really, who they let into the program. So I felt a bit of the imposter syndrome. But I recently listened to a TED Talk as I reflect on the last of the 6 years of my PhD journey. This kind of was familiar, but it was a reporter who was embedded with a infantry division during some of the worst fighting in Afghanistan. And he was giving his TED Talk, but he talked about living the daily life of loss and struggle and fear, being in positions that were uncomfortable. And he reflected on that as being one of the worst and most difficult experiences that he ever imagined in the moment, but he wished he could go back and do it again. And I think that's where we are at the end of this PhD program. It's such a tremendous undertaking. There's such a tremendous investment of time, sacrifice of time with friends and loved ones and hobbies, financial, emotional, that we cannot help but come out on the other side of it with some sense of a redefinition of who we are. We resonated. There's such a resonance with that daily life and the people that you're struggling alongside that you cannot help but be affected and changed on the other side of the program. And when it's over, at least for me, there was an initial void, a sense of loss even, of what to do with my time, how to fill it with, the satisfaction of being amongst like-minded individuals who were great thinkers and really challenged me in my thinking, and the ability to kind of share thoughts and ideas and to learn and to grow and to continue the journey. And there was a sense of, what's next for me after this program is over. And it took me a while to kind of work through, I guess, those emotions and that sense of loss, I guess, to come to the realization that at the end of the program and upon graduating, the journey that I'd started 8 years ago or 6 years ago at that time was just getting started. We had just barely scratched the surface of the journey of what it means to be a PhD, because it is a sense of lifelong commitment to learning, a lifelong commitment I guess, contributing to our society, to our friends, to our neighbors, to other scholars that are coming behind us, trying to find their footing and find a place or a way to make a difference or an impact through their leadership and in their spheres of influence. So what I've come to realize, especially now as a professor and applying the learning, the knowledge, and the experience that I gained from this program, was that we continue the journey, but the pace of growth and expansion of knowledge is not as compact, it's not as condensed as maybe what you get while you're in the throes of PhD work. But now it's, as we go through it and we realize that this journey is lifelong, it's more sustainable. It comes in smaller doses. It comes in unexpected places from people that maybe others have overlooked as not having much to contribute, but because of lessons that I draw from people like Dr. Crumpton and other professors in this program, who saw me as this imposter to the program at the very beginning and saw potential. There's potential there, and if we realize that potential exists, and we harness that potential, and through our leadership and through our mentorship and through our guidance and drawing upon the experiences of great friends and mentors that have shaped us, if we allow them to realize that potential as well, great things come on the other side of that. And I think there's life lessons in that we continue to grow and continue to learn from as we teach. And so I found, at least from my perspective, the PhD program at Johnson was amongst the most impactful experiences of my life. And I thought that I was prepared to be a PhD when I celebrated the final culmination of the event by walking across the stage and accepting my diploma. But I'm realizing over the last couple of years, as I teach and I interact with students who are learning, that I'm learning more from them now than I ever did in the program. And I think the program, more than teaching me how to be a scholar or how to be a doctor, if you will, taught me how to be a student. And so I'm very humbled to be back here, and that's it. That's all I have.
If I could just, then I'll move back in. I had a couple of segments to speak on research, and then actually what Dr. Beard had told me to talk about. I would totally amen what Steve has already said on that. It is the phrase that was given to me, and I will just give to the rest, that the PhD journey is a long hazing into an exclusive club. And it depends on if it's a 5-year or an 8-year, it can be a grueling process, but it is just a hazing, it's a beginning. And where a lot of people, I would say, don't fully understand, they look at huge achievements, and oftentimes that pinnacle achievement is looked at as the end. In most organizations, even in academia, that is the highest achievement. However, in our PhD journey, in the doctoral journey, it is the beginning. However, there's a couple of things when your mentors that have chaired you and say, welcome, Dr. your name, it ends a time that has just been really disruptive on a lot of scales. And I would just say the first 6 months, you're going to experience a lot of the loss that Dr. Stacey has brought to light on there. And I reckon it to a car. I mean, that is revving at 6,000 to 7,000 RPMs. You are trying to balance a lot, and you're just going, the RPMs are there. And all of a sudden you go from like 6,000 RPMs to 0. And that can just really just be a shock to the system. And when they say, Doctor, whatever your name is, it is, remember, it is not who you are. It is a part of who you are. It has been a major shaping influence on who you are, but it is not who you are. And the PhD identity, it must be fully grounded. You are first a child of God. You are a father or a mother. You're a wife or a husband. You are a volunteer. You are these other roles and titles that you have as well. And I would say never lose the identity that you're a child of God. And so part of it, once you are through that journey, you're going to have an obligation to figure out who you are again. And hopefully one thing that helped me through the process, I'm not sure if that's with it or not, but the reflection that came through our process, we were required a reflection journal through a lot of our classes. That helped substantially. The other thing I would talk to is the influence quotient on that. I had such visions of, writing journals and doing all these other things that I had spent, 5 years looking into. Currently, that hasn't happened. The desire is still there. However, it really hasn't happened in the way I envisioned it. So I would just like to give you this. It's an axiom we all know: bloom where you're planted. Bloom where you're planted. And the axiom really gets at the heart of this question: how do I bring value to the situation God has placed me in? And I believe that there's a reason that God has put that research question in there. And the doctoral core, I would say, the people that are here, we're all curious in nature. Said for a long time, the first step in being a scientist is asking the question, why? Because that is a curiosity. And we have a curiosity to know why, what things are like, and how can we bring value to the people that we are around. And so I would just say I've found the most influence by using the tools and the experience and the knowledge that I gained through the journey on there. I've been blessed to volunteer in several organizations. I'm the Dean of Students at Boise Bible College, and one area that I have total influence on is the student leadership at Boise Bible College. So whether the student leaders like it or not, boy, I've just been ratcheting up the old leadership quotient there, and they've been getting a soft doctoral journey, and they kind of moan and groan, but man, it's been awesome to watch the students there. I've been involved in the Boy Scouts of America because my son's been through that. And as you know, this past year has been really turbulent in their shift in some of their programming on some of the younger levels. And I've been in conversation with some of the executive councils, as not only did they make programmatic change, but they were merging councils together. Well, my research in leadership transition and organizational psychology has helped out tremendously with that as well. And there's other areas as well. But I'd leave you with just the third element for me, not just being identified. It's definitely a huge part of who you are. It's not who you are per se, and how you can bring value to where you're at. But also when you say PhD, they say doctor, immediately, it doesn't matter where you are, people think leader. People think leader. So whether you like being in the spotlight or not, just the fact that you're a doctor puts you in that position. And there's a couple of reasons why. One of them, through the doctoral process, you possess a skill set that has been honed. You are able to take initiative. You know how rare that seems to be anymore? You're able to look at a situation or a question and to pursue it. You have learned how to self-manage. Self-manage. There was no one really guiding my hand. And this was part of the most emotional part for me, that movement from student into scholar. Because if you're the scholar, you set the agenda. No one's holding your hand. No one's forcing you to do the assignments. No one's forcing you to construct the testing instruments. You've learned to self-manage, and you know how to get the job done. When you have PhD behind your name, anyone that knows that journey, I'll tell you, they know you finished something. And it was grueling in there. And so when you think leader, remember that you know how to take action, you know how to make some decisions and bring counsel as well. So when they address you as Dr. last name, lead well, lead well. And part of one thing that I honed through this process was the leadership ethic that not only I now carry, but I pass on to my teams, that I lead with an ethic of care, hospitality, and respect. And that's something that I gained from the program that was honed within my research and from mentors. Dr. Crumpton is a huge influence on that, and just love that. So lead well when you bring value.
Thank you both for sharing and for presenting. It's a unique thing to have a PhD, and it's a unique part of your identity. And it's so funny to me, the range of responses that you will have. Somebody asked me how I was enjoying my new role, my new job, as it were. And I said, wow, people are finally starting to call me doctor, because in the church, no one would ever call me doctor. In fact, I had an elder once tell me, I'll call you doctor when you can take my appendix out. And so, it's interesting. And I remember when I was in the hospital with my father after he had a automobile accident a few years ago. And my mom said something about she needs to talk to a doctor. And I just jokingly said, I'm right here, Mom. And she said, no, a real doctor. And so, it's interesting the variety of course, my mom is probably one of the proudest person of me. She's so proud of me, but it's just, that happens, I think, at times as well. So, but I really appreciate your insight and your thoughts into that. I want to open it up for questions. You can ask really anything you want of these two about PhD identity, influence, their own experience, whatever you might find valuable. So the floor is open.
It is Friday at 3:10 Eastern Time.
It's only 1:10 in the mountains here.
Is that right?
Let me ask you about general thoughts as far as your journey is concerned. You shared some of this, both of you did to a certain extent, but what are something in regards to now being a PhD, now that you've done that and you've experienced that for a while now, what would be something that you would tell first year you about both the journey to get there, but also where you are now, to prepare you for where you are now? What are your thoughts?
I would say probably one of the best, well, Dr. Crumpton highly influenced everything. So, so she designed the program, and then we were right there reworking the program with her. And chunking was a huge concept with Dr. Crumpton. Chunking, take this big thing, chunk it up, and then take that chunk and chunk that up, and then chunk that up. That was super helpful. And one thing that still is with me, I went to the first research summit that we had, and Dr. Crumpton gave a workshop on, it's probably one of the ones we had in the track I was looking at, but it was on finding a topic and kind of getting it to completion. And she simply said, I looked at the project, I gave myself 20 hours to work on the project. And so I knew that I had 5 to 7 hours worth of research and this much time to write the paper and this much time to move it to completion. And I was like, 20 hours, what is going on? But what it instilled in me is that there has to be a time management quotient. You cannot be a slave to your own perfectionism or your own biases and beliefs and research. You have to come down and say, look, this project I have 10 hours on, or I have 5 hours on. There's other things that you have to do. You still have to keep food on the table. I'm sure it'd be fun just to sit around and, research all day or whatever, but most people in the doctoral journey have a family, they have a career. There's a lot of balancing that is going on. And that workshop was super helpful for me from that moment throughout the journey. And still, I would tell that to my first year self, is that just remember we are all constrained by time, and manage it well.
Yeah, I'll echo that as well. I think I kind of alluded to this earlier, but I think I spent the first year of my program scared out of my wits, just expecting failure around the corner. But at the end, looking back on it, they don't let folks into this program that don't have the potential to succeed. You just got to, through the process, come to see that potential in yourself, so that you can, through the organization and structure that Dr. Christensen was talking about, manage those taskings and those deliverables and items that are due, and take it one step at a time in small, manageable chunks to get across the finish line. Secondly, I think one of the ways, or one of the only reasons that I maintained my sanity in those, especially during those early years, was having someone that you could confide in. My wife was a tremendous support to me throughout the entire program. In fact, I've even said before, she's read every word that I put on paper, all the way from day one all the way to the end, just to show her support for me and for the undertaking that we accepted together. I think looking back, there's a moment, for me at least, and maybe everyone doesn't have the same experience, but there's a moment in the program where the light switch just kind of goes on, and you kind of realize that you're going to make it, you're going to cross the finish line, and that everything that you've learned and the experiences that you've had, the mentorship that's been poured into you is enough. It's enough to get you across the line, and you realize that you've been changed to a point where the support is nice, the support is helpful, the mentorship is still needed and appreciated, but you don't rely on it as much as you did in the early stages to get you through the next day or the next assignment or the next course. It becomes self-manageable, if you will, with the help of just the additional support on the peripheral when you need it to get you across the bigger hurdles. But that's it for me. I think the organization, the moment when all of the experiences and the mentorship culminates into that moment of realization that you're going to make it, and then looking back on all the mentorship and the support from family and friends that you need to get you through such a tremendous journey.
I would second Dr. Stacey, if I could just add to that, just the support network is really key in the doctoral journey. You alluded to the fact that your wife was really in concert with you. Some of you will not have spouses that give two hoots about it. My wife, I love her dearly. She didn't want to read all of my doctoral stuff, and she did not want to have those doctoral conversations that totally lit me up. And so I had to find some of that in another aspect. And so no matter who you are, I would also say give your spouse allowance to be themselves as well. And I mean, this is, definitely it's a journey together, but that doesn't mean she or he accepted the job as proofreader and editor of all of your papers and all. But if they are, fantastic, you have in-house support. If they are not, then you need to find support. There has to be a way of you just getting in a room with a whiteboard and someone that can kind of talk at that level, and you just kind of put your thoughts on the board and see where they're at as well. So that support network is very huge.
Any questions from the gallery?
I have a question. I think, Cody, you're the one who mentioned about, when you have that PhD title, people expect more from you. You're seen as a leader immediately. And so I just want to hear your thoughts, Dr. Stacey, too, about, considering the pandemic, what's happening around the world as leaders. I want to believe that leadership now is shifting. How are we going to prepare ourselves to lead differently? Because I believe more than ever, there has always been that cliche that, the world is a global village, but, things are changing. And I think we are so interconnected now more than ever before. So I just want to hear your thoughts as, that you're out there in the field. How are you doing leadership differently in these times? And what would be your word of advice for those of us who are thinking about leadership on global platforms?
Yeah, I'll start with this one because I'm not sure. I guess I'm not sure I buy into the premise that leadership is changing. I think if we look at the current situation and kind of our scenario and our culture and context now, I believe we're seeing a culmination of a lot of failures of leadership. But what sets us apart, I guess, is in the PhD program, is that we have from a very early stage devoted ourselves to doing leadership differently, to learning the science of leadership, so that we can apply effective leadership in every context or scenario that we find ourselves in. So for me, I think that as we explore kind of what we learn through this leadership experience or this academic experience or exercise, that we can then apply into a practical application setting. One thing that I'm finding, at least, and I think Dr. Christensen kind of mentioned this before as well, that there is something different about the folks who have a PhD. There's something different about the way they carry themselves. There's something different about the way they go about analyzing and making sense of context in order to apply a solution. And I think we learned that through this process of becoming scholars, so that we can then assess scenarios and apply the appropriate leadership response to them. So I'm not sure that leadership is changing as much as as we're seeing a need for the types of leadership and application of leadership that we are learning in this program.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't know what cohort or where are you at. Is it injury?
Yeah, the N is silent. It's Jerry.
Jerry? Okay.
Yeah. I'm cohort 14. I just submitted my candidacy paper, so I'm just waiting on the feedback.
Jerry, congratulations. That's so great. Yes. I am totally with Dr. Stacey on this one. I understand it seems like the whole world is changing and there can be this crisis mentality. But that's why I said in the beginning, people do look to you as a leader, but they do not, that being a leader does not mean you have all the answers. You are more than welcome to say, this is a crisis and I don't know. Welcome. We will journey through this together. As Dean of Students, this whole thing, we were trying to, how do we keep our student population healthy? I was bumping up against, we're in Idaho, and Idaho, if most of you probably have the same thing that I do about Idaho, something about potatoes, and it's still Boise, and I was like, okay, we got out here. Well, one thing about Boise, it is pronounced that way here if you're native, and I'm not, but I learned how to pronounce it. We are one of the most secluded metropolitan areas in America. However, this whole thing hit, And right before spring break, and about half of our student populace is right on the I-5 corridor. They were planning spring break trips into Portland and Seattle.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, Seattle was one of the hot spots. And so how to communicate through that time. But one of my best mentors on this, Jerry, was Dr. Crumpton. I have a file saved because, and this is something that she exhibited so just exemplary, is just-in-time leadership and the ability to say, hey, this is an area, this is our situation, this is the problem, these are some solutions I'm thinking of, I'll get back to you in a week, or here's the one that we're going with this week, I'll get back in touch with you the next week. But all of those, they do not mean you have to have the answers. They do mean you need to lead in that way, but lead in the way we're analyzing the problem, the way that we are communicating with individuals, the way we are bringing value to those individuals, the way we're caring for those that God gave us in leadership. And those values and principles flow 100% from our dedication as children of God. And then through this program, learning different leadership theories and organizational theories and change theories and all these other things are tools in your toolbox. And yeah, we have a different world now, but I think we've been given some excellent tools. And Jerry, I think you're going to lead wonderfully in your context there.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Well, Steve and Cody, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your wisdom with us. There's nothing like the perspective of somebody who's been there, done that, and who is in the middle of doing something even new. So we're really appreciative of your contribution, and really glad that you're part of the community. Continue to be so, and it's good to see you both. So thank you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
All right.
So good to see you.
We've got a break here about.
Bye.
I'm sorry.
All right.
That's all right. I didn't want to interrupt you.